Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another edition of Talking Point. My name is Fahraaz Patel. I'll be in your company for the next 45 to 50 minutes. Now, as we build up to next year's elections, it's not only the national elections that will be contested, but it will also be the provincial one. Gauteng province, the most hotly contested of all the provinces, will be one that will have a keen eye on. It is, of course, the province that houses the capital of the country, but also the financial hub of the country, that is, of course, Johannesburg and Pretoria. Today, my guest is going to be Mr. Solly Msimanga. He is the DA Gauteng Leader, and he's going to be among those challenging for the top position of the Gauteng province. He joins me now in studio. Mr. Msimanga, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and good evening to the viewers at home.
No, it's
a pleasure to be with you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. Yeah, so Mr. Msimanga, how's the new role been so far? I mean, it's a role that you're quite familiar with,
Yeah.
but how's it been now, knowing that we are just a couple of months away from that big election happening next year?
Well, it's exciting in that we're now seeing the numbers, and we're seeing how it's going to turn away from the governing party. But at the same time, we are very much nervous. Nervous in a sense that the finances of the province and of course nationally, the finances are in a very, very dire state, which means that we will not be able to then provide the basics of services as quickly as we would want to. Then that means that we have to then look in terms of when we come into government, how do we turn things around as quickly as we possibly can before we go over the cliff as the province. And I must tell you, Gauteng is really under pressure, because if we don't perform as Gauteng, you must remember, Gauteng contributes more than 36% of South Africa's GDP.
Yeah.
So if we don't get it right here, then we might as well forget about South Africa ever getting it right. And this is why I'm saying it's exciting that we are facing this challenge and the possibility of us winning. But at the same time, we are facing a mammoth task of turning things around in Gauteng and making sure that we do that as speedily as we possibly can with very limited resources or almost depleted resources. And that's the problem that we're sitting with.
I want to talk about the depleted resources, because that's where the biggest challenge comes within the province. Because when I listen to Panyaza Lesufi's State of the Province address, and we're going to talk about the ANC and, of course, them now having control of the Gauteng province. But when you listen to him, again, there isn't really a sense of conviction that from a resource perspective, things can be fixed within the province the way the public demands. And both you and I can agree,
Yeah.
the public have every right
Yes.
to have service delivery
Yes.
given to them.
Well, the public have every right. I mean, South Africa has been loyal taxpayers. Business people have been saying, even with government's failure, you talk about load shedding, you talk about failing infrastructure, but businesses are saying we have to keep going. We have to keep employing, we have to keep the economy going. So they have every right to demand. But here's the thing, there is no plan. South Africa doesn't have an economic plan. I've been calling for an infrastructure master plan in Gauteng, where we are saying we are losing. Gauteng is losing 60% in certain parts of Gauteng. We're losing 60% of our water. It's gone, stolen or lost underground because of old infrastructure. We are not able to then keep up with the electricity demand, as you know, load shedding and all of that. But over and above that, we should be able to then start insulating, our infrastructure, especially when you're talking about water pumps, water purification pumps and stations, where we should be insulating those from, load shedding, so that we're able to then keep water going. But then it has an impact. The more you have load shedding, the more you have a window of opportunity for those that are stealing cables, the more you have water not being able to be pumped. And where you have water that, fluctuate in terms of the pressure, you then also have infrastructure that also gets to be damaged much more quicker. So you have much more water pipes that are bursting all over. You're having what you've seen in Johannesburg streets that are exploding right now because we're not able to then do certain things. We're not doing maintenance. In fact, right now, if you go to Johannesburg, you'd see that Johannesburg underneath is a Swiss cheese. It's got holes all over because of the zamazamas that are also now, digging all over. There's no plan in terms of how to deal with that. So There's no economic plan. There's no infrastructure management or infrastructure plan, let me call it that. There's no security plan. Now, who would want to come and invest in a place like this? We have to turn it around if we are serious about saving South Africa, and we want to save South Africa. But the only way we'll be able to then do that is if we're able to then get a security plan going, if we're able to get the infrastructure plan going, if we're able to get the economy going, if we're able to do these three things, all these other things will then begin to fall into place.
I want to talk about the water scenario because we saw Rainwater publishing a statement saying the taps might be running dry. I mean, how did we get to that? Because it's water. I know we've got an electricity problem, but now we've got a water problem. And you've got hospitals, and I'm going to mention the three hospitals that are Rima Musa,
Yeah.
Mother and Child,
Yeah.
Paula Song, and Helen Joseph.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, no, there's no way it could happen because these are hospitals. And already the public hospitals are really suffering from not just a resource perspective, but from a staffing perspective. And you add water to that, there's something fundamentally wrong, is there?
Well, that's why I'm saying it's not an issue of us not having water at sources. It's an issue of how we manage our water. It's an issue of how we're able to clean water, how we're able to store water, how we're able to then transfer water from rainwater to the reservoirs within municipalities, from municipalities to to their final resident. I mean, in certain instances, you've places like Lenasia, as an example.
Yes.
Higher-lying areas will struggle to get water. In certain parts, I'm coming from Mfuleni just
Yes,
now,
yes.
earlier on today, where people haven't had water for a month. Why? Is because water that gets to be pumped is not pumped in adequate number, and during that course of pumping as well, you find that there's interruptions because of load shedding that I spoke to. One other issue that I think South Africans need to then start answering is why did the Lesotho Highlands project take so long? And we have gone way over budget. We've gone way over the allocated time, but we're still not even there yet. The level of corruption that has really crept into the South African being in terms of the provision of services is very, very something that should be concerning to all of us. No project gets to be started and gets to be completed on time and gets to be completed within budget. Number one. Number two, you find that the interruptions that are taking place require more resources to be made available. And that becomes also an inconvenience to the end user. It becomes inconvenience to the economy. It becomes inconvenience, as you said, the fact that you're now sitting with a situation where hospitals are not able to then, provide the service that they're supposed to be providing. In fact, when we went to Rahima Musa, we saw some families with, fathers coming in with buckets of water, coming to bring in water to their loved ones who are sitting in hospital. Now, that cannot be. It cannot be that in a country like South Africa, we're still experiencing that. In a province, the biggest economic province in Africa, we're experiencing that kind of lack of services. So what we now need to be doing is to question whether there is a plan. As I said, there is no plan because I have asked for the plan in the legislature. There's no plan. I've met with the CEO of Rainwater, the COO of Rainwater as well, where we've said to them, can you guys give us a plan? What is your plan? What is your 5-year? What is your 10-year plan? What is the province's plan? What is the municipal plan? Because I can tell you right now, part of why I want to have a Gauteng master plan is that all the municipalities are actually interlinked in Gauteng. The Vaal river system is actually the supply of water that goes to rainwater, but you find that water moves from Vaal through Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg to Pretoria, and then even to other provinces like Mpumalanga and the Northwest when you go to the Bretts area and all of that, Madibeng and all of that. So you find that all these things are interlinked, but you lose so much water because this infrastructure is old, hasn't been maintained. There's no plan to maintain it. They only, get to then fix whatever gets to be broken. That is something that now needs to be addressed. And we now need to then also talk about how do we then ensure that once you fixed it, there is also bylaw enforcement. Because what we have realized is that people also tend to build informal settlements, shacks, next to, the water reservoirs or next to the water supply pipes. And what end up happening is that they end up then connecting illegally to that, creating again a loss along the way. So we now need to make sure that once you start fixing your infrastructure, you introduce an element of security to guard your infrastructure, but also to then also have what I call a preventative maintenance plan. Don't only put pipes there. Maintain them. Know when, you need to then go and check whether the pipes are still, standing as they're supposed to be standing, and then maintaining them as they're supposed to be maintained. I think these are things that we now need to be, talking to and answering. And municipalities needs to come in on board and say, this is our backlog. We have tried to do it in the city of Tshwane. Johannesburg, when we were in charge, we then started doing a quantitative survey in terms of what is it gonna, how much is it gonna take, what is the backlog, how much is it gonna to take, and it's quite shocking that we are running into hundreds of billions that is going to be needed to get the infrastructure right in Gauteng.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Solly Msimanga, the DA Gauteng leader and the candidate for next year's premier of the province. To stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with DA Gauteng leader, Mr. Solly Msimanga. Mr. Msimanga, when the fire that, of course, engulfed the hijacked CBD buildings within the city occurred, there was something Minister of Social Development Lindiwe Zulu said, and I thought to myself that, I mean, surely you can't be this delusional, where she mentioned that what happened was because of apartheid. And I know this is a song that the ANC sings, apartheid and colonialism. We're still stuck in that, and the challenges there because of that. Now, yes, there are root problems with regards to apartheid and colonialism. And it's there for all to see, but surely for 30 years, you can't be using that same rhetoric.
Well, I think this has been the hiding spot for the governing party for a very, very long time. When we started raising the issue of Eskom years ago, when the white paper was introduced, now it's apartheid thinking, you think we cannot manage, blah, blah, blah. Where are we now? Water crisis. We've raised a number of years ago. No, racism this, racism that. Where are we? Life is Itimeni, here in Gauteng. When we raised this, Jack Bloom raised this. Again, racial issues, apartheid, excuses were made. And we're asking the question, when do people start taking responsibility? Now, let's go back to that same building that you're talking about. This is a government-owned building. We introduced, when we were in government, a system when we began to then identify hijacked buildings. We were reclaiming them, and we were trying to make sure that they get to be repurposed so that we can then build settlements for the people, whether it's low-cost rental, or we can then refurbish them and make them into offices again, or give them as RDP units, whatever the case may be. That is something that we started doing. What did they do? They came in, they removed it. Social development was actually renting that same building. They abandoned that building. They went to another building where they're paying exorbitant. They abandoned their own building and went and, rented buildings now at exorbitant amounts that they're paying every month. And then when disaster strike, they want to blame apartheid. Now, did apartheid, turn a blind eye when people then run amok into our cities? When people are hijacking, buildings. I was there, the same day that the fire took place. In fact, I met with some people who were saying, as late as the previous night, there were people that were there collecting 1,800 per unit of, the people that were staying there. Now you can multiply how many units are in there, times the number of buildings that have been hijacked. You realize that this is a multi-million illegal business that is taking place. And government has turned a blind eye. Now, I'm led to believe that there might be people within the government itself that are somehow involved into this. Because how will the criminal syndicates know that that building belongs to social development, or that building belongs to a provincial government, or whatever the case may be? Somebody's actually giving them information. Somebody's then turning a blind eye in terms of ensuring that we're not able to then close this building and then reclaim them. So that is something that we cannot now not blame on apartheid. Now, another thing that is very much surprising for me is that the ANC has, for the very, very long time, spoken about the apartheid of legacy, but the apartheid legacy. But the question that I want to ask is, what have they done to address that legacy? The spatial planning hasn't changed. They've actually then continued with the spatial planning where people have to go onto 2-3 taxis to get to a place of employment. They haven't really brought economic opportunities closer to where people are, so that we can then begin to then change, the face of where people find themselves in. Somebody has to get onto a bus, into a train, or even the trains now are not working. So we now have to get into a bus and into a taxi from Hammanskraal to get to a job in Centurion. Leave 4 o'clock at home to be able to get to work at 8 o'clock. And then again, leave work at 6 o'clock only to get home at 9 o'clock. Now that's a mother who doesn't even have time to be seeing their children. And then what they ends up being peanuts that they're not even able to afford to take care of their families. So it means that whatever is that they're earning, they're just spending on transporting themselves to and from work. Now, that is something that they failed to then address in the longest of time. In fact, they allow things to deteriorate even further than what they are. Now, lines that used to run across South Africa, if you leave now Johannesburg, you go towards Vanderbilt Park, there's no line that is there. If you leave now the CBD or certain parts between Mabopane, where the station is now supposed to be going towards towards Hammanskraal, the trains are not operating there. If you go to some of the stations, even here in Soweto, they're non-existent anymore because we've allowed for infrastructure to be destroyed. We've allowed, even here, if you go to Braamfontein, the same stations that are supposed to be the hubs of the trains have been destroyed. Now, there's no way you can talk about redressing the injustices of the past if you cannot take care of the infrastructure that is supposed to bring people up to a certain level of economic means, and so that they're able to then build a better life for themselves. What we have done is actually to turn South Africa into a welfare state. We are now borrowing much more than what we have ever done before. And what have we done with that money? We have given money away instead of building industry so that people can find employment. We have taken money, we have given the 350s away, we have given this grant and that grant, and we have created a dependency state instead of creating a state where people can go into industries, go into small businesses and be able to then create jobs or work so that they're able to then pay taxes. And when they pay taxes, we're able to then, do more and can actually even get more people out of the bottom of the social safety net. But we haven't done that. In fact, we are now hearing some of these ministers celebrating that more and more people are getting into the grant system. I said, this is not something that you should be celebrating. You should actually be hanging your head in shame that more and more South Africans are now not working and not being employed and employable, but are finding themselves more in the line of, the grant system, which is not sustainable in the long run. We are seeing it. As I was saying earlier on, we are paying 2.1 billion rand a day to service the debt that we have. And that money hasn't really built South Africa or even made South Africa resilient in terms of its economy. We are paying 1 billion rand a day that is going towards Transnet and the losses of the rail that we have and the ports that haven't been maintained. We are paying 900 million rand a day because of stage 6 load shedding. And I can go on and on and on about how much we are bleeding a day in South Africa and how much we're bringing in. I'm not even going to go into what the civil salary bill is every month. You look into that, you realize that South Africa is actually a failed state. We don't have money to do anything else. We are just limping from one day to another, and this is why South Africa needs the change that it needs and needs to happen urgently.
Mr. Msimanga, with all of that given, with all of that supposedly a negative sign within the ANC, within the Gauteng, within yourself being the DA Gauteng leader, is the challenge of unseating the ANC become much more easier for you heading into next year's elections?
Well, I think we are not naive into thinking that it's going to be a walk in the path. First of all, Panyaza has now gone on a war path of trying to, or a PR exercise, if I may call it that, introducing 50,000 new jobs that don't even feature anywhere in any of the organograms that are there. Which, by the way, the treasury, the provincial treasury says they're not financially supported. So you now, taking money away from projects to put money into this thing that you're trying to do to be seen to be creating work, which is not sustainable. You also now not having a plan in terms of how you deal with infrastructure. You don't have a plan in terms of how you deal with safety. I've asked, why can't we have a South African police service in the province and units that are able to then deal with the specialized crimes that we do have? You go to places like Rivali, you go to Enadale, El Dorado Park, There's gangs there that people are being killed on a daily basis. I've asked, why don't we have a gang unit in the South African Police Service that are able to then deal specifically with that? Why don't we have an infrastructure police investigating unit that is able to track why we're losing so much copper, why we're losing so much of our infrastructure, and we're able to then deal with that? I've asked that why we don't have the illegal farming unit, not illegal farming, but illegal mining. The Zamazamas are raining havoc right now. I mean, we've had 17 people die now in Angelo, in Ekurhuleni. We've said, why don't we have these units to be able to then look into
But in
that?
Premier Lesufi would say there's no budget for it.
Yeah, but then he goes and instead of then reinforcing the South African Police Service at a provincial level, goes and takes money and introduce a unit that is illegal. Because these are not accredited by anybody. The 6,000 so-called wardens are not accredited by anybody. In fact, they don't even have any authority to effect any arrest. They don't have. There's nothing in law that is allowing them to do, stops and search on their own or, to effect any kind of arrest. They don't have any right to do that. Now, money could have been used to then ensure that we're able to get more policemen and women in uniform and actually get them into vehicles, get them into specialized gear to do what needs to be done. And so that we're able to then get this unit to then do what needs to be done. We haven't done that. In fact, we now bought BMWs to give to the Mapanyapanya, units that are just going around. In certain instances, we've had now also harassing people and, beating people up. Now government is going to be sued for this kind of behavior that is taking place. That is a problem. The second problem is that there is no economic plan. Gauteng doesn't have any, there's no economic plan. We've asked from the Gauteng economic growth propeller, what is their plan? There's no plan. They want to talk about small, Vaal being the water tourist destination, but with what water? With sewer that is flowing into the Vaal River system, with water that is not coming out of the taps. Why? Why are we continuing to do this? They're talking about Johannesburg, being the center for the financial, the financial.
Financial hub,
the financial hub or the financial sector, where the banks and all of that are supposed to be. But have you walked into or have you driven into the CBD of Johannesburg? Businesses are closing. People are moving out. People are moving out of there. Business is actually then going to suffer there, and the people are going to, the economy is going to then suffer there because of the lack of maintaining of the infrastructure, which is supposed to be bolstering the efforts of attracting investors or investment into the CBD. But over and above that, the fact that we don't have a plan that is aimed at relieving Gauteng of its dependency on Eskom is also another problem. Gauteng has got a number of industries. And believe you me, a number of players in these industries are actually then looking somewhere else.
Mr. Msimanga, I had to stop you there because I want to bring that in the next segment, the energy issue and, of course, rebuilding the city centers within Gauteng. That'll be our next point of discussion here on Talking Point after the break. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm still in conversation with DA Gauteng Leader, Mr. Solly Msimanga. Mr. Msimanga, you win next year's elections, you become Premier of the Gauteng province. There's two issues that I would like to raise in whether this can actually be solved. The first one's the energy crisis, and I know the DA has been a big component of trying to push for IPPs. And the second one, of course, how do, there be a reinvigorating of the city centers? You spoke earlier on about Johannesburg CBD. It's not what it used to be. The Pretoria CBD is not what it used to be. Two big hubs within the Gauteng province. How does that get fixed? Let's start off, of course, with energy and having consistent energy coming into the province of Gauteng.
Well, Gauteng is very blessed in the sense that, during the apartheid days, it had a lot of investment in terms of building stations within the cities themselves. You go to Pretoria West, there's, the old ISCO that is now mothballed. You go to Rayval, there's one there. If you come, Kelvin is there and is generating, but it's not generating at its full capacity, which we can, ramp up. I know that there is another one in Johannesburg towards Soweto there that can also be relooked at. Now, you do that, and then you then say to the private sector, I don't have the money to do this. I can roll this over to you. We can talk about how do we then produce electricity. How do you then refurbish these? How do you produce electricity and then feed the electricity into the grid? And then we can talk about how we're able to then ensure that we lessen the dependency of our province, on ESCOM. You do that, you realize that, ESCOM then loses one of its biggest clients in Gauteng, which means that the nonsense that is happening in Mpumalanga, the nonsense that is happening at our stations, Midupi, Kusile, and all of that, it is the prices have now quadrupled in terms of getting the stations going. In fact, we spent hundreds of millions for a station that we couldn't even get 1 megawatt out of. And now we're told we have to spend much more in order to then bring in engineers from France to be able to then get it going again. And nobody's outraged about that. We have now paying for electricity. What you're paying now for electricity, 3 years ago, you would have gotten 3 times the electricity, but now you're getting almost nothing. And then if you were to rely on fuel, the cost of fuel is now what? Going towards 25 rand a liter of diesel if you have that in your home. There was also a talk of subsidizing, those that want to then pull in solar panels, and then also being able to allow people to then bring in excess electricity that they're generating.
Your colleagues
into
in
the
Cape
grid.
Town want to do something.
That is
like
something
yeah.
that we want to do. But the fact that now you have so much pushback from this government also questions, whether there is people that are really benefiting out of the chaos that is being created. Remember, every time one of the plants go down, there's hundreds of millions that is going towards diesel at exorbitant prices as well. So you need to be asking, in the value chain, who's benefiting? Because it looks like this governing party thrives through corruption, through chaos that is being created. So we need to sort that out. We are saying let's introduce more of the independent power producers. You introduce that. You incentivize consumers, for coming up with greener ways of generating electricity, whether it be, solar, or where they can, or whether, we're able to then have certain areas on the outskirts of the province where there can be an introduction of windmills. That is something that we can be done. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we're saying we need to do is, there is a technology that is able to then turn waste to energy and do it much more cleaner. We've seen that in places like Taiwan, where they're actually incinerators that have been built, but they're built in a way that you taking the waste that you have throughout, your province, and you're able to then generate electricity. And what is interesting about that is that the byproduct of that is what you can then use to tie your roads. You can then use that to build, houses, because that can be compacted into bricks. There's a lot that can be done. But it doesn't look like this government is interested in doing that, because once you then empower your citizens, then the opportunity for you to be corrupt or to fleece the system is actually then lessened. That is not something that they're interested in. So that is something that we need to do. Now, you spoke about reclaiming our spaces and getting to ensure that our CBDs are what they should be, in order to be able to attract investment. There's 3 things that needs to be done. One is that we need to then work with from a provincial perspective, we need to work with our local governments in terms of understanding and supporting the infrastructure rebuilding and maintenance going forward. So we need to then have, as I said, that infrastructure maintenance. It doesn't only mean on provincial infrastructure, but it also means in the municipalities themselves. How do we then deal with the issues of the infrastructure? Over and above that, how do we reclaim some of the buildings that do belong to government or even to the private sector? In Johannesburg, by the way, there was a policy that they passed through council that says if a building is privately owned and this person has neglected or abandoned this building and is owing rates over a certain amount, you can then actually then reclaim, you can claim that building. You can actually then expropriate that building, repurpose it, and then make sure that you're able to then do some good with it. Why hasn't that been put into action? Still remains a mystery. So that is one of the way that you can actually then begin to then reclaim the spaces. The other issue is that there needs to be some serious bylaw enforcement. You know, being in government doesn't mean that you always have to be popular, but you have to do what is right.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to do what is inconveniencing people, but for a small time, but in a long term, it is good for them. Why are we allowing somebody to open up a kitchen next to a salon, next to a panel beating shop, that in the CBD? Why are we allowing that to happen? Why are we allowing for buildings where there should be a family unit that is only maximum supposed to be taking 3-4 people, and now you find that 16, 17, 20 people are living in that space? You realize that the infrastructure is not going to be able to then sustain itself. Why are we allowing for people to develop around the CBD or even on the skirts leading into the CBD where other infrastructure has been neglected? So we're now putting up 800 units, but we're not looking at the road infrastructure. We're not looking at the water infrastructure. We're not looking at the electricity infrastructure to support the development that is taking place. These are some of the things that we are going to need to look at and say, if we begin to then address these things, we can then deal with the decay that is taking place.
Mr. Msimanga, I want to talk about the city of Tshwane. Of course, you were the mayor there from back in 2016.
Yeah.
The problem that your colleague and former party and current party member, Mr. Celius, brings is going through at this very moment, dealing with SAMU. There isn't service delivery that's happening in that city as we speak. He's mentioned that there is no budget for salary increases, and he's kept on that, and he's kept on saying it can't happen. I think it's the second month, if I stand to be corrected, that the strike has gone on. How does one strike a balance between finding that budget, but also at the same time making sure that there has to be service delivery for Tshwane? Is he not receiving the support that he needs to try and find a mediation to this, and number two, get the service delivery back? Because the city, it's the capital city of South Africa. There has to be support there.
Well, let me tell you, this is all political. And I'll tell you that Tshwane is not the only municipality that is actually dealing with the issue of the unaffordable, civil wage bill. And this is something that we have been saying for a very, very long time. And now you've seen the circular from National Treasury to then say, posts must be frozen. We need to relook at, the issues of salary increments, and projects will now need to be halted. So it's not a Tshwane unique thing. The only difference is that Cele Brink is willing to then stand and say, look, we cannot be populist. Because if we're populist already, you are sacrificing maintenance, money for maintenance. You are already sacrificing capital project, money in order to be able to then accommodate salaries. For how long would you be able to then do that? If you were to then go and look at the books of Tshwane and say, how much are they able to then collect in terms of revenue versus how much needs to be then paid out, you realize that if you don't curb this, you will not be able to then run this government, going forward. In fact, the same people will be out of work because there will not be a way in which they're able to then be paid. We've seen that in a number of municipalities where even a municipal manager will go to a Pick and Pay and to get vouchers so that employees can be paid using Pick and Pay vouchers. Now, that is not the way to run government. How you need to then run government is to then say, are we able to generate enough revenue so that we can pay salaries? But not only pay salaries, but also to ensure that the infrastructure that we are using to generate that revenue is actually maintained. The fact that you are losing so much in terms of electricity, the fact that you are losing so much in terms of water, the fact that you are now having the same and some criminal elements within SAMU itself who are going around destroying infrastructure, banning municipal vehicles that tomorrow they are going to need to be able to then deliver services. That for me defeats logic. And this is now why we're saying this is all criminal elements, this is all political, and Panyaza has been very quiet on it, very, very interestingly quiet. While we have been saying, why don't you call these people around the table and say to them that the fact that the municipality is not, and they can demonstrate it, the municipality cannot afford the salary increments, as do other municipalities, able to demonstrate so, and even at the provincial and the national level, where these things are now, becoming more and more apparent. Why don't we support somebody who's willing to then say, instead of being popular, I'm willing to step back and say, I cannot afford this, but let's work together. Let's rebuild this infrastructure, make some savings. And then once we've made those savings, we can then talk about your salary increments. When you are in a healthier financial state, you can then talk about all the increments that you want. But this is not something that they're willing to do. And it's all because it has to do with politics and nothing else.
Well, there's one thing I think we can all agree on. None of our municipalities and metros, as it stands at this moment, well, most of it, is in a healthy financial position. After the break, we move on to the last part of Talking Point, and we're going to be speaking the Moonshot Pact and coalition governments, this from a provincial perspective. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. We're in the final part of this week's Talking Point. My guest is the Gauteng Leader, Mr. Solly Msimanga. Now, a few weeks ago, you would remember the DA and 6 other political parties held a convention in Kempton Park to talk about the Moonshot Pact. And of course, Mr. Msimanga, you were present during that convention. When the voter goes into the polls next year and they look at the Moonshot Pact, why would they need to be, or what would they need to be convinced on that this is a pact that not only sees it unseating the ANC, but potentially looking ahead beyond what the ANC may have in terms of them holding on to power?
Well, I think for the first time is that we have now said, instead of waiting until the elections, until you have the results, and then it's a jostling for positions more than talking about how you deliver. Let's take a step back and let's reimagine a South Africa that works, a South Africa post the ANC. What does it look like? What does education look like? What does health look like? What does social development look like? What does the economy look like? You then from there say, okay, if this is what we want it to look like, what will get us there? And then the last thing is the who will get us there. Now, you do that, you avoid what we have had before, where, people are then, it's almost like an auction for positions. So you go and auction yourself there, and then if you get more positions, then you are on that side of the coalition. And then the next time you offer something, then you're on the side. It's unstable and it's not going to work. The reality is that, coalitions are going to be the order of South Africa, whether we like it or not, because of the nature of our democracy. As it matures, if you look at Scandinavian countries, you look at Germany as an example, that's how it is going to be. We're not going to have a party that is going to then, in the long run, enjoy, complete support or complete authority. Therefore, there needs to be an understanding of how you put coalitions together. And in the Moonshot Pact, a number of things happened. Is that one, we then said, after talking about what we want to then see and how we get there, is to also say, how do we hold each other to account? So there's an issue about passing motions of no confidence, resolution when or resolving whenever there's conflicts, and all these things are things that are worked into that. So the voter will go into this election having at least a clear understanding that they are now getting their act together. That those that are in the coalition are getting their act together in terms of knowing what we want to then achieve, knowing how we want to then achieve that, and lastly, how we're going to then assemble a team that is going to get us there, and how we will deal with issues whenever they rise. So at least going forward, we have now introduced something that we can all agree on. And we're not motivated by the positions now where we're saying, if you give me this and I'll give you that, then we are in government. We are saying, way before knowing what the results are going to be, let's put something together. The DA, whether it gets 50+1 here in Gauteng, we will still want to work with those partners of ours, because we want to then say, it's not about a political party just getting into office, but it's about building a strong alternative to what has been there previously, and ensuring that those that are in government are able to then do things very differently to what things have been done before. Avoiding corruption by all means, standing up for the rule of law, ensuring that we're able to then build an economy that is resilient, ensuring that, the basics of services then are being delivered to the people. That's what we're all about. And this is why we are saying, let's think about that instead of talking about positions. And if we're able to then do that in advance, you're able to then set the tone and the residents will know exactly what they get.
Mr. Msimanga, coalition governments, there's been, when you talk to citizens, especially from the city of Johannesburg, they see it as a system that can't be trusted because it's more of a battle within the city council rather than delivering for the people. Your colleague and party member, Dr. Mpopalatse, went through a very similar situation with various motions of no confidences during the Johannesburg City Council. How does politicians like yourself and those sitting in legislatures and councils find a way to make sure that there's no talking, the talking that's done within these legislations and councils, where there's less of that and there's more action that is done in terms of service delivery?
And this is why the DA has called that the City of Johannesburg Council be dissolved. Purely because we are saying you can't have a one-person party dictating to ward councillors, dictating to the majority of councillors who gets to be the mayor, who gets to be the speaker. And then that person doesn't even have a constituency that they go back to, to then be held accountable to. This is why we're also now introducing in the Moonshot Pact an issue of a threshold. We want to have a threshold that you don't have just any Mickey Mouse just then, appearing and then wanting to then take over. And then whenever the wind blows this way, then they go that way. Whenever the wind blows the other way, then they go that way. We then say, build a solid foundation that we're able to then have parties that are serious about being in government, that are accountable while in government, and then you avoid a situation where there is, the moves. And also bring in an element of mediation when there is, because it's like any other relationship, whether it's a marriage or whatever, there's always going to be squabbles. The issue is, what do you do when that is the case? What do you do when parties are not finding each other? You don't run then say, I'm walking away. You actually then, in the Moonshot Pact, you're introducing, systems that are going to be in place, mediation processes that are going to be in place, communication processes that are being introduced to ensure that, these things can be done, properly. So all these things are aimed at addressing the same problem that you're talking about, or what is happening in the city of Johannesburg. Unfortunately, it has been agreed, with the Moonshot Pact, that you cannot apply these things retrospective. So you cannot go to the city of Johannesburg and say, so now we're going to apply this that we've agreed on here. It is an issue of how do we then go forward. And we would have thought that those that are serious about the Moonshot Pact and wanting to then test it, to support us in the city of Johannesburg, to then say, this is unsustainable. The PA comes to the DA and says, no, let's talk, we want to come back. And then we'll start talking, then they go to the ANC and say, the DA is offering us X, Y, and Z. You need to offer us 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's not sustainable. So this is why we're saying, make sure that you are clear who you're not going to deal with. Make sure that you are clear what you stand for. Make sure that you are clear what are the mechanisms that you put in place when things do seems to be falling apart. If you're able to then do that, we'll run much more effective and much more stable coalitions going forward. And I can tell you right now, the coalitions are the thing that is going to somehow save, this country, because there will never be a party again that can take voters for granted, because they know that the power will never ever reside in one singular political party, that instead of taking action against those that are doing wrong, will just then, move them from one department to another, or from one sphere of government to another, but will ensure that those that, are doing wrong get to be punished electorally. And once you do that, you will have accountable politicians in office. You will have politicians that are able to then deliver, because they know if we don't deliver, the next time around, I am not going to get that vote that I used to enjoy.
Mr. Msimanga, we've got just a few minutes left. I have to put this question through. Both you and I are from the Gauteng province. I know you're from Atteridgeville. I'm from Benoni, the East Rand. This is a province that I think those who were born and live here, even those who migrated here, see a special part of it because it's a province that economically holds a lot, but also offers so much in terms of scenery because, you know, there's always the coastal areas or the low veld that offers you, but there's so much that Gauteng can offer. And the DA federal chairperson, Helen Zeller, said that Gauteng's going to determine what happens in next year's elections. How important is this province in shaping not only here provincially, but the whole of South Africa?
Let me tell you, a Gauteng that works doesn't only shape the fortunes of the province and the country. It actually shapes the fortune of Africa. Just go into the CBD of Johannesburg and see what business gets to be conducted here that goes into the SADC through the road, the N1, the N4, you know, go into these other countries and actually even go into as far as Nigeria and all of those areas. Now, if we're not able to then get it right here, we're failing Africa. We're failing South Africa. We're failing the municipalities within Gauteng. So it is going to be very much important that we get it right. And this is why we are giving this everything that we can, because we understand the importance that Gauteng plays and how, you know, the economy has actually been eroded. The economic means and the impetus that, you know, Gauteng used to then give to the South African economy. How is that being eroded? We have to get back there. We have to go back and say to the private sector, government cannot do it on its own. And this is the mistake that the ANC government has been doing, is to think that they can do everything on their own. And that whenever partners want to come in, it has to be, what are you putting on the table? We don't want that anymore. We want partners, whether it's coming from, the private sector, whether it's coming from academia. We want to bring everybody around the table. The NGOs, we want to bring people around the table and say, let's all reimagine a Gauteng that works. What does it look like? And how does each and every one of us play their role? And once we're able to then do that, once we're able to reimagine a South Africa and a Gauteng that works, and we're able to then also over and above that, register and get, to be on the voters' roll and come out and vote and make sure that that dream of 1994 in 2024 become a reality, where we can then really begin to then build an economy that works, a system that everybody can be safe, a system where the healthcare is actually working, a transport system in the province that is, working, an economy that is actually then ensuring that, jobs are created, an education system that is actually then able to then produce learners that can compete with the rest in the world. If we can then do that, if we can think about it, and if we can enact it, I promise you, not only Gauteng will prosper, the whole of South Africa will prosper, Africa will prosper, and indeed the world will begin to then take Africa seriously again.
We hope. We truly do hope that does happen. Mr. Msimanga, I wish we had more time to continue the conversation. Unfortunately, this is all we have. All the best heading into next year, regardless of the result. We'd like to have you back here again on Talking Point here on Hilaal TV. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, sir.
It's an absolute pleasure. That is Solly Msimanga, the DA Gauteng leader, and he'll, of course, be contesting the Gauteng Premier seat in next year's national elections. That's all we have for you here on Talking Point. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team, we say thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.